Thank you very much indeed, Peter, and thank you for the invitation to be here. I'd like to make the case to you that the UK is very much a test case for media independence in Europe generally. I will stress that the bad behaviour of the press mirrors the bad behaviour, the decline of public trust in other national institutions. I will touch on the Leveson report and the disputes over the recommendations of the inquiry into press standards and the dispute, the deadlock, which has resulted over disputes between the press owners and the politicians about the degree of control of the press, and suggest a couple of lessons to be learned. I should just say for myself that I do quite a lot of work for the Council of Europe. I have done a survey report on the mandate and the work of the main intergovernmental organizations for press freedom in Europe, which is online, the Council of Europe. I've done 3 Europe-wide surveys for the Parliamentary Assembly on serious media freedom violations in all 47 member states, and I'm highly critical of the failure of the political class to uphold the European Convention and even to back up the European Court, including in my own country. Okay, as you know, the UK is remarkable among European countries because we have the best and the worst. We have exceptionally vigorous and diverse media, including some of the best in the world, BBC, Financial Times, you know. We also have some of the rudest, the most intrusive and unscrupulous journalism in the tabloid newspapers, which should really be described as the voyeuristic end of the entertainment industry operating at the edge of the law. You have to remember, though, that in TV and the media and the press and online, the UK media are fantastically competitive and innovative. The UK has 10 national daily newspapers with widespread readership. That's more than America or Germany. The framework in Britain, we have been much, the press has been much assisted by the Freedom of Information Act of 2000, but we also have 2 major disadvantages: the harsh libel laws, which have long been weighted in favour of the wealthy and powerful, though they have recently been reformed, and the Official Secrets Act and other restrictive laws which make it hard to challenge the government in matters of national security and excessive state secrecy. But overall, I would argue the British media has enjoyed a favourable environment because we've sustained a system of self-regulation of the media to enable the media to be a genuine public watchdog. And the main components, as you know, are the sort of Press Council, the Press Complaints Commission, with an excellent editor's code of standards for newspapers, and then the special rules applying to the BBC and indeed all terrestrial broadcasting in Britain for impartiality and standards. But recently, the Prime Minister announced that the Press Complaints Commission, the Press Council, must be replaced by something tougher. And it's true, the existing body proved too weak to prevent unethical and illegal behaviour by some newspapers. And now 3 of Britain's all 3 main political parties have united to establish, in the desire to establish a stern new system of press regulation. One example of press intrusion, which you may remember, which most shocked the public, came to light in 2011. It involved an ordinary teenage girl who back in 2001 was kidnapped and later murdered. As a result of investigations by The Guardian and other papers, evidence emerged much later showing that reporters from the News of the World newspaper had accessed the voicemail messages on the girl Millie Dowler's mobile phone to get information for their sensationalist coverage. The public was outraged, and this followed many other revelations of deception, libel, and false reporting by newspapers, including the fact that hundreds of politicians and film stars and ordinary people in the news had been victims of phone hacking. What was clear was that the newspapers had developed a black market in illegal data, confidential phone numbers, car registration numbers, health records, criminal records, and so on. And then, of course, there were police investigations, lawsuits, arrests of journalists and newspaper executives, and the closure of the News of the World. And then, in July last year, the government set up the Leveson Inquiry into the culture, practice, and ethics of the press. This inquiry, together with a separate parliamentary committee, heard evidence of unethical and sometimes corrupt behaviour. And one particularly typical remark was by a tabloid newspaper editor who said, "That is what we do, we go out and destroy people's lives." Critics of the Murdoch empire alleged it had grown so powerful it had become a shadow state, that his influence was so great that he gained favours from successive governments, allowing him to take a commanding or unfair position in both newspapers and TV markets. However, what the inquiries also heard, but was not acted on, in my view, was the equally doubtful behaviour of the police and politicians. The police manifestly failed when they opened a criminal investigation into phone hacking many years ago. They closed it down with just the arrest of one journalist who was jailed. And it took all the work by The Guardian and the others to root out the truth. So the clash now between the media and the politicians. David Cameron admitted at the beginning that politicians were part of the environment in which press standards had declined. They'd become too close to certain newspapers. He was close friends with the editor of the News of the World, used to go have dinner parties, riding horses, and so on. Most people in Britain believe that both political parties have colluded with the powerful newspaper groups because they regard it as necessary to win elections. Indeed, David Cameron hired the disgraced editor of the News of the World, Andy Coulson, as his chief strategist to try to help him to win the election in 2010. It was rather successful. And of course, these press scandals followed a very, very sensational political scandal about the false expenses claims of dozens of members of parliament, several of whom were jailed as a result. And that exposure happened thanks to a leak. It was a stolen disc showing all these records which had been concealed by the politicians about their own sometimes illegal behaviour. David Cameron did say politicians must be careful not to take revenge against the press. But now critics of the parties suggest that that is exactly the path which the parties have embarked on. Now, what did Lord Justice Leveson say in his report? It's very complex, but some of the main points: a tough, independent regulatory system. New elements include a board made up, instead of controlled largely by the press editors and the press publishers, by a majority of people not working in the media. The new board should have powers to impose fines of up to £1 million on newspapers which systematically violated the rules. It's supposed to be voluntary, but newspapers which refuse to join would be liable to pay exemplary costs and damages if cases come to court. And crucially, Parliament, by law, would have to pass a law to set up a separate recognition body which would verify whether or not the regulator was complying with the agreed Leveson standards, and which could intervene and overrule. And finally, there should be, this is much welcomed, a new kind of arbitration system for complaints, because many members of the public and others found that they couldn't get redress or apologies from the newspapers. Now, many of these principles were accepted by the press, including the £1 million fine idea, but putting the principles into practice has proved extremely hard, partly because the politicians started out by saying, or at least the Conservative Party and the Prime Minister said, that we will not use the law, or we will only have a tiny drop of the law, but they've been drawn into quite serious changes in the law. One device that they came up with was to propose a royal charter, rather than having a full statute on press regulation. The Royal Charter is used for the governance of the BBC. It is a consensus document, and it involves a public service and public and broadcasting of public service, other public service broadcasters. It may not be suited for the newspapers, and the press owners have nearly all rejected the proposals of the government. Instead, they are proposing something called the Independent Press Standards Organisation, IPSO in English, which looks very different. Again, some of the key points are the newspaper owners want effectively a veto. They want to have a bigger say on the self-regulation board and to be represented on the recognition panel. They also say that the idea of that newspapers which do not sign up to the system would then be penalised in the court, would have perhaps crippling fines and costs imposed in court, may be illegal under the European Convention, and other things. Now, so the lessons. One is already recognised by all sides effectively. The Leveson inquiry left out the most important new part of the media, which is the internet. And Leveson is widely regarded as not having any idea about social media or the internet. Also very little idea about the way that newspapers are actually run, how stories are made. The old story about, if you want to eat a sausage, don't ask what it's made of, comes to mind. So the general lessons that, from my perspective, I would put up, first a very general one, which is, remember that the United Nations Human Rights Committee and the Special Rapporteur and others have set out very clearly in the last couple of years the limits of state interference and political interference in the media. Essentially, special press laws or punishments should really only be imposed in cases of incitement to violence or hatred, child pornography, promotion of genocide, and so on. For the rest, try and keep special laws out of it. The Council of Europe, Secretary General, wrote to the British government twice. Once about the Leveson proposals, saying he's worried that any form of intrusive regulation is bad for press freedom, and again after the mass surveillance stories were revealed through the Guardian newspaper and the arrest of David Miranda at Heathrow Airport. Again, a very stern letter to the British government asking whether they could justify this under Article 10. And those who watch the British political scene are very worried that a number of other laws, gagging laws, laws against whistleblowers, laws to prevent the publication of information in the public interest have gone through Parliament. And the editor of The Guardian, Alan Rusbridger, said of the case of the destruction of the computer hard drives with his material about the operations of the American and British intelligence services, that the government is moving to conflate terrorism with the work of journalism in the same way as it happens in countries like Turkey. On the other hand, so I've got one paragraph each for the politicians and governments. What should the lessons be? Essentially, keep out of the media yourselves, but ensure that the law is enforced equally on all who break it. Don't try to legislate to make the press more ethical. Any attempt to do that is liable to the criticism that you're trying to influence the media to advance your own cause and not to embarrass the politicians. The public interest is best served by a free and uninhibited press. What about civil society and the general public? They have a very important role to sustain a free and independent press, but also to protest against not only greedy politicians, but also against abuses and deceptions of the press. And now we have powerful groups in the UK, the Media Reform Group in particular, which has been extremely influential in forcing the press barons to establish a more effective system of regulation. And the new industry body, which they are proposing, not the political one, is supposed to be starting early next year, but there's a long way to go. As for the press and the media, I mean, they can only play their proper role as a public watchdog, which the European Court of Human Rights talks about, by remaining independent of political and commercial interests. They must expose and criticize wrongdoing and corruption wherever they find it, and not be subject to improper interference or control by special interests. So the situation here in Hungary, where the new media laws have created a media regulation system designed and influenced by one political grouping, is a warning. Warnings too from distortions of the media in Italy, in Bulgaria and elsewhere, from excessive control of leading media in the hands of a few or for political reasons. Those who believe in a free and independent press, I think, can take heart from one important fact in the UK. As I mentioned, the illegal actions of some British journalists in the phone hacking scandal was exposed not as a result of any law, not by any action by the police, but by the investigative journalism of The Guardian and a couple of other newspapers. In a free society, there can be no substitute for a free press. Thank you.
Extremely interesting about Greece or against Greece, but you didn't say anything about the second party or the left party, which by implication is different from the nationalist party. Where does that fit into your overall Greek political culture?
Well, thank you for your presentations, but I have a little bit puzzled because you mentioned earlier that there is no political parties on European level, no political culture, all are nationalistic in a way. But I'm not sure you're right, because there is links, and I think the question for me is whether you have European media scrutinizing this European level or connections cross-border, because there are connections and there are networks, and we are all learning good and bad examples from each other, and I think the sadness is that it's not taken into the debate in the media.
I'll make just add a couple of points. I do agree with you, Tim. This is Lundgren, that Europe-wide coverage is not in common, and it's very patchy and inadequate. The Financial Times has been described as the in-house journal of the European Commission. Remember one story, somebody who worked for one of the directorates who said, we have these frantic meetings all day, and I read the FT the following morning to find out what happened. And of course the Economist, two strangely enough British institutions, and of course there was also the European, which again was the English language, and dare I say it, CNN and BBC World also I think contribute quite a lot to the Europe debate. They are fairly widely watched, and Euronews too. I saw a very interesting debate just yesterday. I hadn't seen that forum, but it was really quite good and very topical. Small audiences, and of course the national bias is always there. In terms of what to do to promote that, I'm reminded that about a month ago, just over a month ago, the Commission rather secretively put out a tender in its extremely official gazette for quite a large fund to set up a new EU online media organisation which would promote the Commission's priorities and policies. I mean, that's a shorthand, but it did talk about in order that people should know about and focus on the priorities of the Commission. This quite quickly provoked a reaction from the Brussels Press Corps, who objected, and quite quickly they took it down again. This was apparently an initiative from the Viviane Reding's directorate. Now that to me is the wrong approach. I think the idea of new forms of funding for public interest media is an interesting one, and this will be discussed by my association at our Congress in Brussels in late November, and a number of interesting ideas are on the table. But it is very hard to get a consensus, and it cannot possibly be across the board because each nation is different. We don't want to damage the existing public service media funding systems. But all is not lost. My final point would be just to amplify what I said before. I really do believe that the European Convention of Human Rights system is in crisis. And the reason is that the politicians have not had the guts to confront these distortions of not just the market, but of basic freedoms in so many countries. And to me, that is the forefront of the problem. And the answer is not to force the idea of more Europe or more support for the European Commission down the throats of the electorate. But it's always going to be frustrating for politicians if they feel they're not being fairly treated. But the answer is not to try to control it themselves. As I said, politicians should stay out.
Thank you. We have a question or comment from Black, which is, and your will be the last one because of the time. Yeah. So we have two questions.
Thanks. I'm Peter Molnar, and here now I represent the 1 Million for Hungarian Press Freedom group, and my question is that so it's related to something that seems to be perhaps somewhat new phenomenon. Maybe probably it's not new, there is hardly anything new under the sun, of course, and it is that in several countries like Hungary, Turkey, or Russia, if we just take the example of Hungary, that the government does not restrict press freedom or does not reduce pluralism fully or to the extent that people could not have their voice heard. So it seemingly it might be fine, but what's happening that governments create a legal and a legal environment and they supplement it with other means of influence and control, in which large segments of the public sphere and large segments of the media, including the public media, is controlled, and then the majority of the society cannot really participate in a meaningful public discourse based on free press and access to information. So the question is that how do you think we can somehow deal with this issue both on the national level, and what can the European Union and other European organizations and international organizations do with this? Of course, a response to it is the European Citizen Initiative itself, but I just wanted to raise this question specifically because I think it's kind of a tricky one. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. We have one more question, which will be the last one in this panel, and after that we react on.
Köszönöm szépen. Én a Molnár Péter kérdését máshogy tenném föl. 3 évvel azután, hogy monopolizálták a magyar média ellenőrzést, és feltételezhetően erről a mai fontos találkozásról a közmédiában nem fogunk semmit hallani, vagy nem fogunk semmi érdemlegeset hallani. Remélhetjük-e azt a magyar ellenzéki pártok hatékony működésének, illetve a strasbourgi, illetve a brüsszeli politikusoknak, hogy 1 év múlva ez a tanácskozás, ami majd zajlik, Magyarországon megrendezhető lesz egyáltalán, és mi magyarok nem fogunk-e félni ide eljönni, illetve ellenkezőleg jövőre ilyenkor a magyar közmédia tisztességesen be fog számolni egy hasonló tanácskozásról. Köszönöm.
Thank you. Would you like to react on Peter Molnár's comments first, because it's quite general to everybody.
If I may, I mean, I'm very involved with monitoring of media freedom problems, including these regulatory problems, violence, justice systems, the growth of impunity, which is protecting those who judicially harass or intimidate journalists or jail them, as well as all kinds of threats and indeed pressures for self-censorship. And this is why I speak of a crisis of the convention system, and now increasingly a crisis for the European Union, which of course the Commission mandated the high-level group to look at these things. It came up with some very, very strong views on the way that the Lisbon Treaty and the Charter of Fundamental Rights meant that the EU was under an obligation to give the highest priority to protecting free speech and media freedom, which is the same language as the European Court. The European Court speaks of giving the largest scope of protection for freedom of expression because it is so vital. It's an enabling right for other rights, and the initiatives which have been put forward in the Council of Europe and in the EU have so far been squashed. The exception appears to be if the European Union Institute is going to start the media pluralism monitoring system, which will be very interesting. My association and others like the high-level group have urged the Commission to be bold, not to hide behind its lack of competence, but to say, well, we are all member states of the European Convention. We have obligations, and they're not being observed. So we should actually use the Fundamental Rights Agency also as a monitoring tool. And the fact that the Council of Europe, the politicians have been so cowardly or so self-interested that they have refused specifically to allow any monitoring system regarding the media because it is so sensitive to the politicians. It's the one area which is excluded from monitoring, I mean by the Secretariat, by the Council of Europe, the intergovernmental system. I mean, I'm a one-man monitoring system for the Parliament. I mean, I assist the rapporteur occasionally, and that is a very important process. So this new idea of a Council of Europe sponsored online media forum to highlight media violations would be a very big breakthrough. The French government has put forward has supported it. It has been approved in principle by the Committee of Ministers, but I promise you it's not going to happen. The budget allocated is, I'm told, €5,000, for which you may be able to set up a website but not put anything in it. You need staffing. The staffing of the media side of the Council of Europe is pitiful. It has been cut under this chairman. This is hypocrisy. And in the Belgrade Ministerial Conference of the Council of Europe, this will come up. The ministers will not go. They can't be bothered to go to the conference which happens every 4 years. 4 years ago in Reykjavik, the last ministerial conference, I and others from the media side argued and won a commitment by all those ministers, a political commitment, to review anti-terrorism laws regularly to ensure that they conform with Article 10. What has happened? They have hidden. They have not just not done it, they have run away. They have taken this issue away from the Intergovernmental Media Committee, where I have a voice as an observer, and they've put it with the anti-terrorism people. What interest do they have? Nothing has happened. This is the way for institutions to disgrace themselves, to lose their credibility. And this has been said many times. I mean, Open Society, these media groups, the Reporters Without Borders, and do really an excellent job in increasingly, I think that the think tanks, these universities and the think tanks are probably the best way to make this part of the conversation and to make the politicians. But unfortunately, in my own country, the mood is so hostile to even the idea of human rights, and with the leading party now talking about withdrawal from the convention or scrapping the national law, the Human Rights Act. This is unbelievable. This is barbaric, and it's going backwards. So we have to speak more loudly. We have to win the argument. If the politicians are going to be so obtuse, then it has to be explained to them.